Russia blasted an apartment block in Ukraine with missiles on Wednesday and swarmed cities with drone attacks overnight, in a display of force as President Vladimir Putin bid farewell to his visiting dear friend and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping. Security camera footage captured the moment a Russian missile slammed into the side of an apartment building in the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. Flames explode from the blast, followed by plumes of smoke as pedestrians flee in terror. Reuters journalists filmed the aftermath of the shattered building.
Когда вышел, разруха, дым.
Resident Ivan Nalivaiko said, "When I got out, there was destruction, smoke, people screaming, debris. Then the firefighters and rescuers came." 81-year-old Alexandra Pavlova said she was lucky she made it to the hallway after the blast destroyed her home. Sitting in an ambulance, she said, "I have nowhere to sleep." A local official said the strike left 1 dead and 33 injured, including 3 children. And at a hospital outside Kyiv, a teacher is treated for burns from a Russian strike on a dormitory.
When the blast wave hit and the ceiling started to crumble, we were all together at that moment. There was a lot of smoke and our clothes caught fire. I am so happy my children were smart enough to tear their clothes off quickly. We were a bit slower and we suffered some burns, but it really doesn't matter because we are alive.
The bombardment came as Xi wrapped up his visit to Moscow. Hosting Xi this week was Putin's grandest diplomatic gesture since he launched the war a year ago and became a pariah in the West. The two men referred to each other as dear friend, promised economic cooperation, condemned the West, and described relations as the best they have ever been. Xi departed, telling Putin, quote, "Now there are changes that haven't happened in 100 years. When we are together, we drive these changes." Washington criticized the timing of the trip just days after the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin on war crimes charges. In Washington Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told a Senate committee that the world was watching this war to see whether or not Russia's aggression would win the day or go down in defeat.
The stakes in Ukraine go well beyond Ukraine. I think if China is looking at this, and they are looking at it very carefully, they will draw lessons for how the world comes together or doesn't to stand up to this aggression.
Despite the bloodiest fighting of the war, which both Ukraine and Russia describe as a meat grinder, the front line has barely moved for 4 months.
It's been an exceptionally wet winter in California, with at least a dozen so-called atmospheric rivers battering the state since December. They've wreaked havoc, causing flooding and landslides.
And it just kind of sounded like an earthquake.
California has been slammed with nearly 150% of average rainfall so far this season, said the state's water department. So, what is all that water doing to the state? Atmospheric rivers are storms like rivers in the sky that can dump massive amounts of rain and snow. They can carry up to 15 times the volume of the Mississippi River, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The state is mostly drought-free for the first time since 2020, according to a University of Nebraska-Lincoln monitor. But in the big picture, it's still dry. Just a few months ago, large parts of the state were in extreme or exceptional drought. The period from 2000 to 2021 was the region's driest in 12 centuries, according to one study. And climate change is expected to only make it warmer and drier. The rain is causing extra growth of grass and scrub, but that could dry out by summer and leave a thicker fuel bed for wildfires, said one fire official. On the other hand, another says larger shrubs and trees hold in more moisture, making them less prone to burning as quickly. But there's another problem: mudslides.
For this to happen, it's probably from all that rain that we got.
The bare land around burn scars can become susceptible to them with heavy rain. In the last century, California wasn't thinking a lot about recharging underground aquifers. It built infrastructure to send water from north to south for irrigation, human consumption, and flood prevention. Now, it's trying to change tack. A strategy released last year calls for storing up to 4 million acre-feet of water, or enough for 8 million households, mostly in the ground. The overused Colorado River received comparatively less rainfall from the atmospheric rivers. The river's long-term prognosis remains dire. Still, that said, the snow has led to a small reprieve for Lake Powell and Lake Mead. They're the country's two biggest reservoirs and are both fed by the Colorado River. All the snow has prevented them from falling to dead pool levels, where they can't produce power or deliver water downstream.
French President Emmanuel Macron drew an angry response from unions and opposition parties on Wednesday when he said he would press on with plans to raise the pension age despite fury among many French people. In his first public comment since pushing through the bill, Macron said in a televised interview he was undeterred.
Donc oui.
And so this reform is necessary. And I say this to the French people, I don't enjoy doing this. I would have preferred not to do this. But it's also because of a sense of responsibility that I express my commitment to do this in front of you.
The comments did little to smooth things over. On Wednesday, protesters blocked train stations. In Nice, an effigy of Macron was laid on the tracks and thrown into the air. Polls show a wide majority of French are opposed to the pension legislation. And the past 6 nights have seen fierce demonstrations across France with bins set ablaze and scuffles with police. Macron insists reform is needed to ensure the pension system does not go bust. But this union leader said the new law, pushed through Parliament without a vote last week, and which raises the pension age by 2 years to 64, needs to be stopped.
How can we hear that the street has no legitimacy? How can we hear that the pension reform, despite all the protests, will continue to be implemented? How can we legitimize this crime of democracy with these announcements? No, it has stirred up more hatred.
Socialist Party lawmaker Olivier Faure said Macron is creating the chaos.
He is an absolute pyromaniac. He's setting this country on fire. He pushes people toward entrenchment. He creates anger. He's the one who fuels the fire today.
Macron says he wants to re-engage with union leaders. This union member said she's open to talks. But before that, a 9th nationwide day of protests and strikes is set for Thursday, according to union organizers, with massive disruptions expected to train travel, airports, and schools.
Avian influenza, commonly called bird flu, has killed more than 200 million birds in the past year. It's also infected other animals. Human cases, however, remain very rare, and global health officials have said the risk of transmission between humans is still low. The strain that's causing concern is Clade 2344b, a subtype of the H5N1 virus that spreads quickly among wild birds and poultry. Here's Jennifer Rigby, Reuters global health correspondent.
The fear among scientists is that this strain of bird flu could jump to humans and spread between humans and cause another pandemic. That's a fear for lots of different pathogens. This one's come into the news because of the record number of infections in birds, and then this jump to mammals like seals, bears, a few others around the world.
It emerged in 2020 and has since spread around the world. Unlike earlier outbreaks, this H5N1 subtype is not causing significant disease in people. So far, only about a half-dozen cases have been reported to the World Health Organization in people who had close contact with infected birds. Most of the cases have been mild, but in February, an 11-year-old girl in Cambodia died after she was infected. The way the virus enters and infects cells is one reason for muted concern, health experts told Reuters in February. Human flu viruses typically bind to receptors found in the upper respiratory tract. The H5N1 virus still prefers to bind to avian-type receptors to enter and infect cells. Those receptors are scarce in humans and located deep in the lungs. But Rigby says the virus could have an impact in other ways.
Well, when I speak to scientists, and I talk to mainly scientists who are looking at the threat for humans, they actually all warn about the threat for food security because it's affecting so many domestic birds and farmed poultry. And then there's also a risk for biodiversity, even because there's been such big die-offs amongst birds and other species worldwide.
Experts see the spread to other mammals as a warning sign to step up virus surveillance rather than a signal of a new pandemic. Still, they have not ruled out the possibility that H5N1 or another avian flu virus could mutate and spark a health crisis. Vaccine makers have already been preparing.
A lot of them have been working for years on pandemic potential flu vaccines. So if a flu strain jumped to humans, they have already got kind of prototype vaccines that could be used to protect humans.
But Rigby says production could be slow to ramp up, and coming off the heels of the COVID-19 pandemic, Rigby said global health experts are wondering if we'll be ready for the next one, whether it's sparked by avian flu or another pathogen.
I think there is genuine concern among global health experts that we haven't learned the lesson of COVID around vaccine inequality and around inequality in all sorts of ways, tests, treatments, even PPE.